Well, friends, we're here with one of our potentially oldest friends. Not quite the oldest, but pretty old, Richard. Not
I don't think I'm that old.
in age.
How old is he?
Not in age, but in age of relationship. We met. Do you remember this? We met him back with Shannon at the Square booth at OSCON in Austin.
OSCON.
Forever ago, basically. I remember
Forever ago.
Shannon more than Richard, if I'm being honest, but I'm sure Richard remembers you more than he remembers me.
Maybe. I don't know.
I do remember that. That was forever ago. I mean, OSCON, it's not even real anymore.
I know.
People don't even know what it is. It's the open source
have a moment.
Convention or conference.
Yeah, we should have
all those good O'Reilly conferences. Used to be so much fun.
Yeah, they rolled them all. They closed the whole section down. It was as soon as COVID hit, OSCON got canceled, but not just OSCON, but O'Reilly events, like the entire wing of their business just gone forever.
Do we miss it? I miss it. I miss it.
I do. I do miss it.
I do. I haven't been to Portland since, I don't think.
Yeah.
But All Things Open has stepped up, in my opinion.
And Raleigh, though, but is Raleigh a comparable city? No offense, Raleigh.
Raleigh's cool.
Raleigh is cool. It's got the best steakhouse, right?
Not as weird.
Sullivan's. All day at Sullivan's. Anyways, let's lament later for other things. Okay, so Richard, we produced a podcast together.
We sure did.
And, I got to say, this is like, again, with the years, this is years in the making. How far back was it when I was like, y'all need to do a developer podcast for Square? How long ago was that?
Oh, geez. That's definitely got to be like years at this point.
I'd say 4. That's what I'm thinking, 4.
He asked the question, but he already knew the answer.
Yeah,
well, I'm guessing at 4. I don't even know.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think I remember we were talking about that. I remember talking about it with Shannon a little bit. And I think we just weren't ready to pull the trigger on that. But I'm so glad that we finally came around. You were able to convince us.
What do you think held you back? We know, like, be specific with what a large team, a large platform like Square, how do you think about new content like that brings in people? And it was not a sales mechanism. I know marketing was involved in it, and that's always a good thing because you want their blessing and involvement, obviously. But how difficult was it to think about creating a new content piece that you had to nurture and sell inside? Like, what were the holdbacks from you?
I think it was difficult to come around on it because when I joined Square, I kind of dove straight into taking over content for the blog and revamping how we were going to be writing content, switching from really short blog posts to longer form, in depth, really trying to build some meat for developers to chew on when they were coming to learn about the platform. And then when we launched the YouTube channel, doing that 0 to 1, it was a lot of stuff that we had to learn in the process. And I think it just made us a little bit hesitant. We had a small team to figure out how do we actually scale up a podcast. And I guess, at the time I probably should have just understood that I could have leaned on you all a little bit more, because that was actually essential to getting this up and running, was trying to just, go with experts who can actually tell us what we should do, what we shouldn't do. Because when we were doing that for the YouTube channel, it was we were just flying blind. We did a lot of things wrong, but eventually got things right. And so I think that, and then the combination of that was trying to sort of understand what is the overall story. I think I would admit I was a little bit hesitant to think that I could source all of the guests frequently enough to have a constant pipeline of episodes going out. So I think that's kind of what held me back. And looking back, it's should have just started way earlier. I should have been thinking about blog content. The best time to start a blog is, 5 years ago. The second best time is right now. And I think the same can be true of a podcast. Just start making the content. You're going to learn, you're going to find the right stories. You're going to find what works. And we're already seeing quite a few people inside the company, a few people outside the company who really like what we already produced with some of these episodes.
Well, that's a vote of confidence for sure. Yeah, I think you're spot on with when should you start, because I feel like, a lot of brands reach out to us because we have a great megaphone to developers across the globe, and for good reason, right? We come every week, every day, bringing great content. We're in the trenches, and we can help brands reach these developers in meaningful ways, but we can only go so far with that. And I think there's a story that brands have to tell. I think that's the thing that I recall most is like Square has a developer story you're not telling. And if I have to repeat that more than once, I'm like, Richard, Square has a developer story you are not telling. And the way, one of the many ways you could do it, obviously, is via a long form, authentic conversation, AKA a podcast. So I was a big proponent of that. And then if you think about Block, at the Block level, like y'all have this larger, I don't even know how to describe Block, really. I don't even know how to describe Block compared to Square. I just know you have a big, big mission. Jack Dorsey is a big personality to even have at the helm. So that's one thing. But then big vision, big dreams, big ideas. And ultimately our idea, or at least your idea, my idea was to, how can we not just do this for Square, but for Block as well? So
yeah, that's the dream, isn't it?
What's the Square Block relationship? I don't even know it.
It's kind of funky because I think like most people think of as like separate companies, and I think they were kind of operated functionally that way. But like it's all, as far as like I've understood this, is like it's all Block, and that like each one of these other things are like brands that are part of Block. But I joined before we became Block, so it's like I still have this like thing burned in my brain that I work for Square. Recently, that's changed a little bit, so I work on all Block products, doing developer relations now. So yeah, like the relationship is like each one of these divisions is kind of focused on a different audience in the economy. Square is focused on businesses and like trying to like run small businesses, mid-sized businesses. We even have some enterprises. And then Cash is all about consumers, like trying to give financial tools to people who are like, hey, I want to go invest in Bitcoin, or I want to go buy stocks, or I want to send money, to my barber. Like it really helps like essentially act as like a consumer banking product. And so that's kind of like where there's like a little bit of, getting both sides of the counter is kind of like what we talk about. And then we have like our other brands like Tidal with streaming. And that's like kind of like focused on artists, and we're trying to figure out like what ways can we like enhance artists, because like they kind of operate like their own business. And then we got like some of like the more out there things like Spiral doing Bitcoin grants and open source Bitcoin, trying to really transform Bitcoin into like the digital currency of the internet. And so yeah.
So it's the Square Developer Podcast. Was there conversation with you all about like, should this be the Block podcast?
Oh my gosh.
Square podcast.
Richard, he's opening up the name. Oh my gosh.
Oh man.
Tell him,
he's like
how much can you share about that? I know some of this is BTS.
How can we get Richard potentially in trouble?
Oh no, I don't want to do that. No. But
it's not going to, that won't happen. No, definitely. That was like what I was, when I was originally talking to Adam, that's really what I want to do. And that's still in the back of my mind. I still want to be able to do like that type of a podcast. So it's not out of the realm of possibility, because I feel like there's a lot to tell in terms of developer stories. And I don't want it to just be focused on like stuff that we're doing inside a Block. I want to talk to people about like, how are people leveraging AI with AI clients, or building MCP servers, or connecting different tools to one another, or implementing Bitcoin dashboards. Like I think we just recently launched our own like open source framework to like show your holdings as a company. And so, yeah, that was like what I originally was like wanting when talking to Adam about this podcast. But in terms of like how we were actually going to be able to get a podcast started, it looked like it was going to make the most sense doing it for Square. Because we ended up finding we had like a lot of stories of sellers, what we like to call like seller developers, people who are like, hey, like they're tech savvy, they start their own business, but then they start finding our APIs and building their own stuff for themselves, and really extending things. And so I think that's kind of like where we wanted to sort of like get the foot in the door of like, let's get a podcast started to show that this has legs. And then my hope is that we can sort of, capitalize on that and do something a little bit bigger, a little bit more expansive.
I thought your question was more around the name, Jared, because we put some effort into
that was a long debate.
That's part of it too.
Much longer than it should have been.
Part of it. How much can you share about that part of it? I know that was I would say a point of contention. I would say that lightly from my side, just because I'm so passionate. It's not because y'all were combative. It's just because I'm like, we could not have had a 5-year, 4-year sales cycle, let's just say, of me suggesting something to you all. You finally decide to do it. We start doing it. And it's like, whoa, hang on a second. We can't call it that.
I don't want to sell anybody down the river on this, but that was frustrating. Like I would definitely say, and I was like definitely in your camp on this of like, I wanted to have a more fun, better name. I think, I remember you were really pushing on squaredev.fm.
Still am.
And I thought, I still think that's a great name. I feel like I say that and then somebody's going to like go snag that domain and we're like, oh, well.
We'll bleep it out. We'll bleep it out because they can't know for sure.
Don't let them figure it out. Read my lips. But that was definitely like a front runner. I just, I can't really go into all of the details of like why that one wouldn't work. It's mostly having to do with like domains and trying to like acquire domains and going through some sort of internal process. I'm actually quite happy with the Square Developer Podcast. I know it's like very on the nose. It's very, straightforward. It is what it is. And I think that works for developers. My original, this is what I don't know if I would get in trouble for, but whatever. I originally wanted to call it localhost. Cause we have like a big push on like trying to build like local tools for sellers to be able to connect with cash users, to be able to like give local offers so that you can like sort of see your coffee shop down the street. They have an offer in Cash App that if you go over here and use cash, like you can, get 10% off your latte or something. And I just love being able to tell these stories of like, this is like the local host hangout to talk about sellers and developers and what people are building on Square. That did not fly well with, once you get all the other folks involved who want to sort of like put their little touch on it, it went through a very lengthy review process, trying to see like, is this going to conflict with some other copyright, trademark, whatever. And so like eventually we came all the way back down to the Square Developer Podcast.
Gotcha.
Well, now I feel bad because I feel like that was me. I pushed against that. Wasn't that me?
But against the Square Developer Podcast originally?
Local host, yeah.
I see valid arguments against it. I thought it was fun, but I could also see how like it's not really self-evident. Like, what is this podcast about?
I think it's a cool name for a podcast, but not for a podcast from Square. Like,
right.
If Adam and I were starting something about networking, maybe like local hosts would be cool. But even for Changelog, like one of the things that we had was all these shows and different brands, JS Party and GoTime and Practical AI and the Changelog. And every time that you come up with a new show, you want to like be like, it's still us from the Changelog, but now we have a new name. And there was people that don't even know, like JS Party was you guys, And one of the reasons for our simplification back down is like, we're just the Changelog now. Like everything's Changelog. Yeah, we have Changelog and Friends, we have Changelog News, but it's all Changelog. And so that's just more straightforward. And I think for Square, if it's like Square has a developer podcast now, it's not as creative, but so much easier to find. Like it just connects the dots for people. And so I think it's the right choice, even though probably, Richard, deep down inside of these meetings, I would have been on the local host side most likely. Yes. It is just cooler and more interesting.
And when you zoom out too, so we haven't gotten to this part of the story yet, but there is the bottom line, which I believe is an online publication by Square, which is essentially I would probably describe this as like the media hub.
Right.
It's blog content, it's written content, it's video contents.
That's a good name. Bottom line for a transactions focused,
Yeah,
business. Running the business.
Yeah.
Focused on the bottom line.
Right? The bottom line? I like that name.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of an umbrella over the top of this. Is that right? Over the top of the Square Developer Podcast, like is the bottom line is
So
a bigger
they actually
thing that it's one of.
Yeah. So the bottom line is kind of focused on like everything for Square sellers, or it's basically like our very large publication that has like all different kinds of stuff. And they have other podcasts on there that are like, say, like more business focused or SMB focused. I think there's one that was like called Tipped. I cannot remember any of the other ones for the life of me right now. I live over in developer
Paying
world.
It Forward.
Yeah, Paying It Forward. And so like they've had these other podcasts, and so this kind of gets folded in with that umbrella. I think part of the idea is that rather than like having this just on like our technical blog, we wanted to have this in a place where like more sellers can be familiar with like, hey, we have a lot of solutions outside of, what you might see in an app marketplace, or you can hire people to build stuff, or you can build stuff yourself. So I think that's kind of like the idea that it would get a lot more exposure over there.
I'm a big fan of like content that you discover as an individual and you get inspired by. So I just imagine someone who is building the beginnings of their business and they're thinking, gosh, taking payments is one thing, but then it's like, well, how can I dream about the future of this business? I have a background in software. I have a friend who's in software and they want to be my co-founder, however it plays out. I feel like someone in this world could discover the Square Developer Podcast and pick it up as a business owner and figure out how to dream with Square. That's what I always envision. Not just like, let's just feed developers more developer content, but more like, how can we inspire new ways to think about the future of commerce leveraging Square? And people discover that content and those who are doing it. And that's what the show, kind of capitalizes on. I was like dreaming for that kind of thing, not just, let's nerd out, which is always cool. But at the same time, like, let's nerd out and also bring somebody into the fold that may not have normally found this content or saw how this franchise business, is pretty scrappy with their tech, but like really polished with Square.
I mean, like, that's spot on. I mean, like, I couldn't have imagined like what we would end up talking about on the podcast from the beginning to like when I actually got to like sit down and, interview these folks. There's one that like Ray Alano is a great one where, they were just like, hey, this started out in a garage. I just wanted to be able to like sell stuff to expanding into like 120 franchises. I mean, like, and it's just building on like the scrappiest way possible. And they were able to build stuff completely on their own. The other one that like really impressed me, I don't think the episode's come out yet, but it's this company called Headpins. They're like a family entertainment center in Southwest Florida. And they only started using Square during COVID. They like started using like our Square Online product to basically do like curbside pickup, to be able to like, hey, we need to be able to keep the lights on here. We're going to do curbside pickup. Nobody can come in here and do bowling, but we have food. And so we're going to be able to sell food through Square using their online offering. From there, it like, they just started using, like they found out that we had like APIs, SDKs. They were like, hey, we want to build this like kiosk solution. So somebody can come in, buy arcade value, load it up on a card and pay for it using a Square terminal. And so like they started just expanding and like trying out all these different new things. And at the end of it now, they're like just diehard Square users. And they say like, Square is like the source of truth. Like if we can't push the data back into Square in some way, we're just going to use a different product. And I was just like, I never would have found out about these stories until like I sit down and I talk to them, because I think like the way that we ended up getting in touch with them is like somebody within our company recorded like a promo thing that was completely devoid of like the developer story here. They just happened to like find out like, oh, they're working with this like one API. Let's go put them in touch with Richard and like see if he, wants to talk with them. And I was like, yeah, of course. And so getting to like surface these stories has been really great, because talking to people in our community, like they just even are eager to understand like how are other people building on this platform. And I feel like this is like a much better way to be able to get people to understand how this is working. I can definitely say like doing DevRel, I could sit here and talk about all the different ways that you as a developer can build on this platform. It's only going to go so far. When I actually have somebody who's like, no, like I've actually built this business on here. You can go see it. You can go try it. Like that is just 10 times more powerful. And like the podcast is like a way to basically be that vehicle to let people tell that story.
That Headpin story is a great example, because we edited all these shows, but I'm also mastering the shows and I'm listening to them and I'm chaptering them. and I'm in these details. And I recall this part. Like, I didn't listen to every episode end to end, but this headpins one I was actually really impressed with. And I think it was closer to the end, if I recall correctly. They were saying something like, once we realized how data flows through Square and how it works and all this stuff, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, of course, they were just thinking, like, how can we get all the data in there? If it can't go through Square, we don't want, like, it was as if it was this layer that helped them ensure all the data was correct, could be accessible via an API, et cetera. And it became where they wanted all the data to go through Square, and it was its source of truth. And I was like, you can't get that kind of story just randomly talking to people. How do you expose those kind of ideas and that truthfulness and that honesty with how they leverage a platform? Like, you can't pay for that. So that's not something that you go and do a case study on or something like that. Or you get sort of these great customer stories that are inspirational and spark curiosity for others, and they're trapped in these weird, I don't know, like content silos where it's like it's in this case study, but the case study doesn't have any life. It's only this printed document. It's only via PDF kind of thing, or this one single web page, which almost nobody ever goes and reads. And you got these great stories out there. And I'm like, wow, this headpins one was an example of what we dream for this conversation, for this podcast.
Yeah. And I would even add to that, like, it wouldn't work if I went out there and I told people, like, you should be using Square as like your source of truth, because I feel like anybody hearing that would be like, oh, yeah, of course you would say that. Like, that, like, kind of like puts me into this position of like, now I'm just entirely reliant on Square. Yeah. And like, there's probably instances where I wouldn't recommend that some people use Square as their single source of truth. But I would like for people to know that, like, some people have done this and it's been wildly successful for them. They have simplified like all of their analytics, all of their like understanding of like how the business is being run. Like, their marketing department can now say like, hey, how do we get people to like, book racing while booking, like waiting for their bowling appointment and like doing more arcade? Like, what kind of promos can we mix together? They now have access to like this full customer experience every time somebody like sets foot inside of one of those headpins locations.
How do y'all come to these interviews in terms of obviously you found that one because somebody inside of Square had already connected with that customer, but is there an editorial aim that you're shooting for, and then how do you execute on it, etc.? Asking for a friend.
Yeah. I wish I could tell you that we had like a really good process.
Okay.
It's very much like us getting together with a bunch of folks and saying like, all right, who do we know that and we just kind of like blasted out feelers to a bunch of people who we know were, building something, working on something, being part of the developer community for Square. I've built relationships with a few people over the years. And so, first round is like going through those people and be like, hey, would you like to be on the podcast to talk about like, how you built your kiosk for Shake Shack, or like how you built out like the whole ordering system for Chase Center, and then kind of like just going from there. Once we had like a few people into the book, then we can kind of at least use that as like hey, we already have these folks bought in. But yeah, the sourcing was kind of all over the place, just trying to like send out a bunch of messages to people that we knew in the community or partners. And so, yeah, it was kind of all over the place. I was glad that we were able to get as many folks as we did. I feel like once it's out there, maybe we have a little bit better chance of getting people to want to be on it.
Yeah, totally. Once you have a reputation, it's much easier. We have a much easier time nowadays getting guests than we used to, when they'd be like, excuse me, who are you? Or Square already has the name, so that helps. But they're like, Square has a podcast? Okay,
I mean, you could imagine I remember vividly the puzzled look of the first one or two guests that I had on, and had to like be clear with them, like, yeah, you're the first one. And they're like, oh, okay. I have no idea how this is going to go. And I'm like, me neither, but we're going to figure it out.
That's fun. Yeah. Even the interviewing process is a journey to learn. Can you talk about becoming a host of a podcast, what it takes to before, during, and after?
I think that you kind of set me up pretty well in understanding. I think like from a few times when we had sort of informally recorded some things, had some conversations, it kind of gave me a little bit of understanding. What I found worked really well for me is, so we would set up like a pre-production call with anybody that was going to be a guest. I'm going to like sort of let it out that like that was also the point where I was trying to figure out, is there a story here, or do we need to like kindly say like, hey, this isn't probably a good fit. Let's, find somebody else. I don't think there was actually anybody that we ended up having to say no to, which was great. But it's just like, there was like that pre-call to just sort of have an exploration of like, what are you using? How are you using it? Tell me about the business. Those were all like pretty essential, because I would sort of build out my themes of conversation to fall back on as we were talking. And so it was definitely like a very, very much a learning process, because I think my first few recordings, I was too self-conscious of like trying to like keep the conversation flowing. And I think as time went on, I got more comfortable of like letting the conversation meander. There's probably 1 or 2 episodes in there. I'm not going to call out which ones, but I'm sure from having listened to some of them, but like they were like way too Square heavy. And in retrospect, I'm like, I really wish that we talked about more than just that. As I think like some people even coming onto the podcast were just like assuming like, oh, I should just talk about Square stuff because, I'm a partner of Square, I'm using Square, I should just like talk about Square stuff. And so I eventually started trying to push the conversation out into other directions just to keep it a little more variety, help them sort of relax more. But yeah, I've definitely found that like, what you said originally, it took me a while to actually come around to it, of like being like less planned, more organic. I think the one thing that I did take to heart before is like I would sit in these pre-production calls and people would ask, they were like a larger company. They're like, can you please send us a list of the questions that you're going to ask on the podcast? And I had to be like, I was like, no, there's no list of questions. This is just going to be a conversation. It's going to sound really weird and really canned if we send you questions ahead of time, because I don't even know if I'm going to ask all those questions.
Well, we get that question once a week.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I got Text Expander answers for that one. But it's always a nice way of saying no. I can give some, some people just want like a idea of where we're going to take it. And so I can provide a couple of like, well, here's things that I think are interesting, but I can't give you questions because I haven't written any yet, nor will I have by the time the show starts. I'm going to go ahead and just think some thoughts and then do what I think the best podcasters do. And I try to do, and Adam does as well, is listen. Like that's the key as a host, is to listen and react versus like my next question is, and then read it off of a next card.
Yeah, that sounds.
Yeah, it's like no one wants to listen to that.
I did find that like one thing that was like also super helpful is like clarifying to people ahead of time, like we're not here to make you look bad. Like we want this to be good. We want this to be enjoyable.
Right.
We want to look good. We want you to look good. If you say something that you didn't like, I would always tell them like, just stop. Tell me that you want to re-say that differently and pick it back up. Like there's, you don't have to be like worried, like, oh my God, I'm going to say something that's going to get me in a lot of trouble. Like it's not that big of a deal.
I'm like a happy parent over here right now.
I don't know, like preaching right back to the choir.
I'm like a happy parent. Sounds like my kid went out into the world and graduated and succeeded, like,
yeah.
I mean, everything he's saying is literally things we say
for sure
as a script, but it's not a script because it's become what we share with people, which is just what you said. It's so cool. I love that. It makes me feel like the literal years of investing into it has paid off. Because I've always cared for you, Richard, and our relationship with Square and working with you and Shannon and others there, Mary Lise and others, and just an awesome team behind Square over many years. And to now be at a point where we can go to the bottom line, we can go there and listen to all the shows and all the episodes we can go to. I really wish there was a domain though for the podcast, because I can't say it right now.
Even if it just redirected would be cool.
Yeah, I know. I've told Richard this.
I'll go start this like secret mission internally.
Well, you just got to be able to say it on the air and have people
put into this chapter right here. Adam tried to describe our podcast and couldn't send people to it directly because there is no URL.
Okay, go to squareup.com/US/EN, but only if you're, of course, in the United States. Then the-bottom-line/podcast/the-square-developer-podcast. Easy.
Too easy, Jared.
Rolls off the tongue. That's what I said. I said to the entire team. I was like, "This will roll off the tongue when we read this out."
Yeah.
It's so good. Anyways, the point is the child has grown up, and I love that. I mean, I think when you have these conversations, it's so impossible to say, "Here's the questions." It's so much, in my opinion, so much easier to produce and to listen to when you know it's a real conversation. Mm-hmm. It's formed in sort of topics, of course. Just like this, our topics are, let's talk about the show we produced, and let's talk about AI and MCP and APIs because you thrive in that world.
Yeah.
That's our 2 bullet points for what to talk about during this OSCON Friends. And so you can't just like tell people, here's the questions, let's go down one by one. That's not a podcast. A podcast is an authentic conversation that is just long form. You can't hide behind the answers. You can't, I guess, be hidden, I suppose. Not that we're trying to not expose anybody, but even with them, like you gave them room to talk about their own tech stack, even like with Headpins in particular.
Yeah.
And many of them where they were just like gushing about their own stuff. And it was cool. I love it.
Yeah. In fact, you just now reminded me, like when asked earlier, what was like sort of like the determining factor when we figured out that we wanted to do a podcast, it was just, okay, so I'm going to run you through this like fluke of events that happened. Is it so?
Okay.
You had participated in this one year, like you remember our unboxed event. We had you come and interview Jack and have that whole conversation. It's one of our better performing things that's on our YouTube channel, just because everybody loves hearing from Jack.
And me.
So one of the years when, and you, of course, I mean, like,
and me.
You were able to poke and prod him about Rust and get him to like sort of geek out. So yeah, it's what ended up happening was one of the years we were running Unboxed. As I won't go into too many details, but it's kind of chaotic getting set up for like a large event like that. And so a lot of things changed last minute. And so originally we were supposed to be like filming something else the day or two before Unboxed with some of our partners, some of the DevRel team. And then tons of things started falling through. And so we had to completely change what we were filming. And so it turned into me just doing interviews with several of our like community developer friends. And like, I think we called these, I'm going to butcher this, like dev chat sessions or something like that. If somebody goes to Square Dev on YouTube, you can find the dev chat sessions. That to me was the first step towards like doing a podcast, because when I sat down and did the interview, I actually just had like very loose questions and basically like it was in a podcast like format. But we just had like a full film crew there filming it like it's, some sort of partner interview. And I think like when we saw how well that was received, even within Square and from the partners who participated, that to me was like okay, I'm 100% convinced like we can actually just do a podcast, because the podcast is actually like, I don't want to like say it's easier, but it's easier in terms of like, hey, I'm in my home office studio type thing. They can be anywhere. We're not having to fly everybody into a single like location. And so, yeah, that is like actually what totally convinced me that we should be doing the podcast, and like this is what the content should be. So that was like kind of like my revelation.
Gotcha. So now you're on the other side. You have a season in the can. I think episodes are coming out weekly. It's 4 years later or whatever, and you've successfully created and branded and shipped a podcast. So being where you are now, could you speak to anybody who might be back where you were a few years ago thinking, maybe we should have a podcast? Like, what were the hard parts? What was unexpectedly easy? Is it all worth it for like another platform company to go through the building process and the creation process? What are the hard parts? What are the easy parts, etc.?
I would say like the hard part, I mean, Adam, you became familiar with some of the hard parts of, I would say that like my number one recommendation is like just start small. Like, and when I say small, I mean like with a small team. Like, don't try to get too many cooks in the kitchen. Yeah, just too many cooks in the kitchen. Everybody wants to go in a different direction, and I think that like really just start doing it. Even when we first started doing the podcast here, I think one thing that helped a lot, and I'm nearly positive this was like Adam's recommendation, is that we actually just brought in somebody internally to like run like a kind of like test episode or two. And I think like, it's just, if you go and you do that, like you can just build at least the tiny bit of confidence that you need that like this can work. And you can hammer out all like those little things that you might be worried about ahead of time. The other thing that I would just say that is, it's actually a lot easier than anybody might be making it out to be. Like, you just got to start, like, just sit down, have a conversation and record it. It might not be great the first time, but like when you just sit down, you have the conversation, you record it, you can have a sense of like what went well and what didn't go well. And it's weird that I'm saying this now because we ran into this same exact thing when we launched our YouTube channel. Is that, when we first recorded episodes of the YouTube, we like, overproduced way too much. And we realized like, okay, we can like throw out like half of the work here. Like we were way overthinking it. And I think even before doing this podcast, we were way overthinking it. So like, like the thing that I just can't help but like continually think is like, should have just like listened to Adam and trusted him more about it. That, just start it. The format will start to like make sense. And I think like the only part that I think I still got hung up on was like what like the content is going to look like. And I think in retrospect, like you just need to start inviting like a few guests and start recording, because the content will start to make more sense as you start making it. Because you might think, oh, this is like what I want the content to be about. You start having the conversations and the interviews with people, and then you realize like it keeps going in this other direction. And this other direction is actually like not what I thought originally, but it's working. And so like I always think of this analogy a lot of the time. I've said it to my team. I don't know if it works well, but I always say like the map is not the territory. So like the map is an abstraction of where it is. So like there's a very big difference between reading on a map of where you're going and actually walking the path. And so like in actually walking the path, you can see like, hey, there's a tree falling here, or hey, there's like, not a lot of cover through here. Maps don't tell you these things. They can kind of just tell you an idea of like, oh, I can get from here to here. But it's very different actually going and walking that path. And I think like when you actually go and make the podcast,
yes,
that is very different than like when somebody tells you like how to make a podcast.
There's a lot of analogs to software too there. It's like you can't really know until you're in there what actually needs doing, what's not going to work. Like you have to get real, just to go back and borrow some 37 Signals, Getting Real, which was a good book title. The territory is the reality, right? The map is the abstraction. And so it's a helpful tool, but until you're actually in the real world, out there where that tree is, the map didn't have the tree on it. Well, I missed something.
Yeah.
You don't actually know. And so you have to just get going.
It's not full fidelity. It's just a map.
That's right. And then you actually create the thing, and then you're like, oh, well, that wasn't very good, but I got some ideas for my next try. And you just iterate and shine and, don't go back and listen to our early episodes, please. All the people do that. And I'm like, what are you, a glutton for punishment?
Yeah. I think too with you, Richard, that we had so our audience is aware of this. Our ad styles are uniquely different than I think other ad styles are, where we really go inside of a company and have deep, authentic conversations and pull out clips from that and produce them around a story. So that's how we do it. Mm-hmm. And you and I have had many conversations, across, we don't just sit down for 20 minutes and hammer out the content. We'll obviously have various conversations throughout. And sometimes we'll have an hour-long session and 20 minutes recording. But I had learned enough about you and learned enough about how you operate to have confidence in what I think your potential was. And so my idea wasn't just, Square should have a podcast. It was like, no, Square needs you to produce the podcast because you have all these unique insights into DevRel and what Square is and this evolution from Square to Block. And, I don't know what your title is on the inside around APIs. I know that your title is mainly around DevRel, but I think you've also been in charge of the API or APIs generally for many, many years now. So you kind of dual titled yourself. So you had this depth and background and ability to talk to people and share stories that I just was like, man, you are an underutilized asset that can do some cool stuff for Square. Let's make it happen. And so I had complete confidence in you from back in the day.
Well, it's just so very warm to hear that, because
so warm.
I feel like I spend I spend so much time just like steeped into these like ridiculous conversations. I mean, they're not ridiculous; they're important, but they feel ridiculous. Conversations around like API design, API. That dual title is like I lead it's called API Working Group. I kind of like externally just say it's like an API design team. They kind of like set the standards, guide teams on like how to build APIs in a cohesive, like consistent manner. And yeah, I think that actually spurred from our DevRel team just kind of got frustrated at times, I guess the nicest way of putting that, where we would have an API, make it all the way out to being put into the developers' hands. And then like the developers like, this doesn't work, or like, this isn't like well designed. And, we were just like, this doesn't make sense. Like, why are we putting this in their hands? And so then the design group at that time would consult with us pretty regularly. And it eventually got to a point where like, okay, one of us needs to actually be a part of this group and helping you make these decisions rather than just, being consulted every once in a while. And so we ended up, eventually I ended up leading it as things changed over. And so we've kind of like formalized this into like a company-wide group in terms of like API design, because Cache actually has like their own APIs now, and they decided to adopt the standard. And so, yeah, it's something that I don't talk about up until recently more publicly. And I'm hoping to actually talk a lot more about like API design, especially after like I participated in like, we had this like sort of hack week internally where we started building, everybody just went crazy on building MCP servers. And the light bulb like kind of clicked for me when we built an MCP server for some of Square stuff. And I was like, oh, this can be so powerful, but you kind of have to have that foundational layer in order for it to like be capitalized on.
Well, let's unpack that. So model context protocol, it's all the rage. Everyone's shipping servers. I saw GitHub's official MCP server is hitting the top of GitHub trending. I saw Shopify, MCP, Amazon, MCP servers. You're on LinkedIn talking about MCP. So what's all the hype and excitement about? It seems like a new style API. I haven't actually looked into it. I know it's for LLMs to get context, but why do we need something new? Why can't we just use the APIs that are already out there?
That is like the great question that I feel like there's many people asking the same question. Like, why can't you just, hand like a bunch, like say, here's an open API spec, hand it to your LLM and say like, go like build this thing for me, like, and look at it. And part of it is because the LLM clients need some way to like know how to call tools. And so like, this is kind of trying to standardize what the tool calling is. So like the way that I sort of describe MCP is like, it's like the SDK for robots. And so like you have these well-formed ways of saying like, hey, this is how you call the payments endpoint, or this is how you call the catalog endpoint. And rather than like, because I've tried this before, you can sort of just like hand an open API spec to the LLM. Usually it's like too large or unwieldy for it to like really kind of parse out the right things for the particular context. And so MCP kind of like formalizes the way that you want the LLM to interact with your platform.
Okay.
And so like, and it also is trying to like formalize like things beyond like, say, just REST APIs. So I've seen some folks who actually just use it for like tapping into like snapping like visual elements out of a computer and sort of using that to interact. I saw a demo of somebody actually like having it work with an Android app using some sort of indirect visual like reasoning where it's basically taking a snapshot of the UI and then figuring out where to like, oh, press this button, and then like gives an instruction to like press a different button. So like it can go well beyond just like, you know, traditional like REST APIs.
Yeah. It seems like on the face of it, except for that beyond stuff, it's kind of delivering on what the promise of REST was, at least with the Helios stuff, where it's like you should be able to give a single endpoint to a programmer, and the programmer can, through tooling, discover the entirety of their abilities. And it never really worked out. It always ended up being like a spec or go read the docs. I will make the docs really good, which was a step up from bad docs. But still, it was never like, you're still just basically reading URLs and finding nouns and like, okay, now I got to add this and nest that, and then I get what I want, and then I can post, etc. And that was never what we wanted it to be, but it was better than, I guess, an RPC endpoint with a list of methods you could call. And this seems like it's maybe taking that concept and saying, well, when the LLMs need their context, we're going to give them everything they need to actually do that without a human reading the docs, or without an LM even having to read the docs or scrape the site.
Yeah, I think like what you touched on there is like, I've been thinking about Helios like a lot recently, that like for people who built their APIs in that way, I feel like they're definitely advantaged when trying to integrate or adopt AI, because it's self-documenting. Like it can figure out how things are linked together. You know, I feel like they just have an easier time with integrating this type of stuff. One thing I would actually, we had this like argument, well, not really an argument, slight disagreement in like how to view APIs going forward. Was somebody within our company said like, oh, we should design our APIs to work better for robots. And I was just like, well, I here's where I would disagree on that. And mainly that all of the AI LLMs have been trained on like APIs, SDKs, documentation that's all designed for people. So like it is trained to try to understand it in the human-like way. And so I feel like trying to design your API to work in a more robotic way makes it less human, less usable, less useful overall. And I think that like it just means that you should build better, more well-defined and like clearer APIs going forward. Because if we eventually hit this dream of AGI, like you don't need to have a robot specific API. You can have like a human API. So either a human or a robot can use it.
Interesting. So what does an MCP server look like? Describe it to us.
Sure. So at the base level, an MCP server will first like sort of define all the available tools that you want to give to it. And so like, you know, in the case of like, say, Square, I'll give an example. Like you might say like, oh, there's a catalog, a customer, a payment tool. And then it sort of describes like how these can be used in different contexts. And so like when you ask your LLM, hey, can you like go build me a menu for a taqueria in my Square account? It's going to go to the MCP server and say like, list all the tools, and then figure out like, okay, of these tools, which one of these kind of matches with something that they're asking me. And then it'll go call the tool, and then the tool will sort of give an additional description of like, what else can you do with this? And then it kind of figures out from there, like, you know, how to actually accomplish the task that you want. So the thing that I always think about with like MCP servers is like it's like actually ridiculously simple in what they actually enable, because you're just sort of like creating this like tiny little abstraction layer of like saying like, oh, here's all the things that we're giving you access to.
It's all just JSON at the end of the day, or in terms of actual interchange formats, it's like typical stuff. There's no special sauce.
Essentially, I mean, like, so like, I think there's there probably is three. So like, this is the part where I'm like, I've only sort of worked with like server sent events is one format. So like, that's when you can have like a remote MCP server. And then you also have like command line ones. So like you might have like a command line tool that it's, you know, I've seen a lot of them are just like calling NPX and then whatever, like this, basically it's like a CLI app that's like sort of packaged together for it to call in and get all those different tools. And so those are kind of like the two main ways. But I think the most common interchange format is probably JSON that people are sending stuff back to the LLM with.
And how do you plug these into your clients then? Does it depend on the client maybe?
Yeah, it does depend on the client. So like when we were building an MCP server for Square during this hack week, Goose is our main open source AI client that we've created here at Block. And it has basically like sort of this standard config. And I think it was originally a YAML. It might be in JSON now. That basically just sort of says like, this is the name of your extension. This is, the interchange format. Is it going to be, server sent events, or is it going to be command line? And then you just kind of like say, here's the command. I've seen versions of this where like people actually are just like running a Docker container locally on your system. And like, that's actually what it's communicating with. And so I think Claude has like its own standard config file. But for the Goose desktop client, we have like a way for you to just like do a deep link URL. So you can just like click that button and it immediately starts pre-configuring that into your desktop client and installs the extension for you.
I'm thinking back to the early days of Web 2.0 and REST APIs, or let's just call them web APIs. And this spirit of innovation and discovery and creativity with not open API, the spec, but like open web APIs. Specifically around like Twitter and Flickr and Foursquare and that group of social cool tech companies. It was really the heyday for mashups and trying new things. And it was really fun. And I feel like some of that excitement right now I'm getting flashbacks to that with MCP servers, because there's a lot of cool demos right now. You can plug it into darn near anything. You got an MCP server. I saw a guy who just like plugged it into Postgres, and of course his LLM can speak SQL, but it's just better. It seems like it can just do better with not having to write SQL just to hit the MCP server, and you can just talk to your Postgres database. And then I'm curious about like, well, what happened the last time was the good old days got old, and then the companies grew up and they needed to make money and they shut things off and they locked out third-party developer, and it just got very hostile eventually. Sometimes out of necessity, sometimes you don't know, but it happened. And I'm curious your thoughts on that parallel, because it seems like MCP and like letting your LLM talk to X, where X is not the social network, but X is all of the things that have MCP servers, is like really cool right now and could produce some really interesting use cases and like let some awesome hacks out. And then I'm wondering is there a plan for when that spirit of openness changes? What are your thoughts?
No, I think it's like, what you touched on. I think Angie Jones, my new manager who leads Block's DevRel, just gave a talk on this kind of like mashups. Like it's very reminiscent of the mashups of the heyday of 2.0. And I think, what was the example they had? Like it was like Google Maps and Craigslist. And then like that actually was what spurred Google to create open API platforms for the Maps product. And, so like there's a lot of like very interesting innovations that like ended up coming from this. But yeah, like I think when the way that I view it now is like we're kind of in like the peak of the hype cycle. Like you're seeing this like massive explosion and people just like producing all these various things. And the recoil I'm sure that we're going to be seeing is like all of the anti-patterns. There were probably anti-patterns before, but we just decided to like do them again in this new way. So like, I think one thing that you talk about is like, it's probably useful for somebody to be able to talk directly with a Postgres database. I'm sure that there's some people that find a lot of value in that, but it's also very quickly you're gonna realize like, well, should I enable other people to talk to my Postgres database? And that's when I would say like, no, there's a reason that we had these abstraction layers created, because we don't think that, everybody should just be talking directly to each other's Postgres databases. That's why we created those interfaces. And so I think that like, that's what we're going to see start happening. I think we saw like some early signs of this, like where, people identifying security vulnerabilities with MCP servers. It's probably something that's not well defined within the protocol. But I mean, like that's, I think that's been true of a lot of standards as they've been developed. I think even like and like the first version of OAuth, there were security vulnerabilities within the format.
For sure.
And, it unlocked a lot, but, there's always going to be like ways that people are going to find like why it's not going to quite do or should do everything that we want it to.
Right. And the stakes are higher. Of course, with auth, the stakes are high. But now when it's like plug an LLM into your life, every facet of your life, whether it's your bank account or your Foursquare account or whatever your Square account, there's a lot, when there is a vulnerability, there's just so much opportunity for bad actors that we definitely will see some trouble there. This is a brand new thing. I mean, I think Anthropic came out with it back in November, and of course they had the task of getting other people besides Anthropic to actually adopt the protocol, which was open and I think designed to be not an Anthropic thing from the start, which is a great way to get it going. But here we are in April, and it seems like, will it be the protocol to rule them all in this next age of agentic things? Not sure, but right now it seems like it's got a lot of momentum behind it, and quite possibly might be. And so it's going to be vulnerable until it gets robust. I mean, that's what happens. You have to face the real world for a while and find all the obvious things and work out the kinks.
And that's part of the reason why, like, I still, when I was writing about it on LinkedIn, that like, I think that the platforms that are going to be able to leverage this the most, but also like last and survive some of like the downsides a little bit better, are the ones that are already invested in really good API platforms. Like if you already have that built in, like with OAuth, authentication, permissioning, like if you have that basis and then you're wrapping that, your MCP server around that, you have a lot of the safety guards already put into place. My concern is for the people who just like haven't done that like base level of work, and they're just like, hey, we're just gonna like stand up an MCP server. It talks to Postgres. It talks to like this other thing with inside our internal things. That's I think going to be a recipe for disaster in the long term. You might see some initial short wins, but I think over time, like it becomes just a huge exploit. Like I think that we debated this inside with a couple other engineers in my company. Like, hey, like, it's really cool that we built an MCP server that can talk to Square's APIs, but why stop there? Why not like have it talk to some of our internal services? And I had to like point out to folks, I'm like, well, if we create an LLM agent that can talk to Square's internal services, that effectively makes them public. Because now I can go and like, I'm sure somebody could end up doing some sort of prompt engineering to basically like dissect what are all the different tools it's calling internally and be like, great, I'm now going to go use those to write my own program on top of those. I don't need the LLM to do it for me.
How about this as an idea? What if AGI is essentially a self-building MPC server that the LLM talks to discover what it needs? It doesn't have what it needs, so it makes new stuff, and it calls the same MPC server to discover more of itself. So it's like it needs to do something, can't do it, builds it, can do it, builds it, needs to do something, can't do it. It's like this constant talk between the LLM and the MPC server.
Well, I think like, isn't like that new, I'm going to be perfectly honest here. So I'm like kind of just shooting a shot in the dark of like with Google's new agent to agent protocol that they're trying to propose. Like one of the theories could be that you can have your agent go to this hub of agents and be like, hey, they're asking me to do this thing. I don't really know how to do it, but I'm going to ask all of these other agents in here, can any of you solve this problem? And then like one of them goes, oh yeah, I can. Maybe that's the way that you have this like this agent to agent hub.
It's like Upwork for agents, like, hey, I'm looking for a designer.
Looking for this function. Can't do this function.
There we go. It's like Fiverr for agents.
Exactly.
So you just like throw the bids out there.
I'll do it for 5 tokens.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like
race to the bottom.
I'm trying to hack this Square MCP server. Can somebody help me? I got an agent that does that.
What's the race? Given MCP and what's happening, what is the next arms race when it comes to that layer of the implementation? Like, who's next? What's the next big thing?
Past MCP or with it?
Well, I mean, if it's burgeoning, what is it going to enable? What's the next big thing? I mean, you kind of touched on it with Web 2.0 and access to APIs that had freedom and innovation. And
well, that's why I was concerned that like the providers may change their heart about the thing. Obviously, Richard, you are one, so that's why I was throwing it to you, because the spirit of innovation, openness, and like Square obviously would be more useful if I could plug my agent into it and get information ad hoc and like have it do things for me without having to like code it up myself, etc. However, it leads to the agent gets the client gets superpowers. And so whoever controls the client, and right now OpenAI very much controls the client because ChatGPT has hundreds of millions of users, and like it's starting to become the Google of this era in terms of just the default choice. And then Square becomes this thing that plugs into ChatGPT, and now OpenAI holds your interface and you're just commoditized. Like that's a concern, isn't it?
I mean, it is a concern, but I think like, I want to believe always that open source will find a way to win.
Yeah.
And I think like the open sourcing of models, the trying to incentivize folks to releasing like the weights and like their measurements and sort of like insisting on the transparency so that we can like have confidence. Cause I think like that's a precarious relationship to be managing. Like if you don't open up a little bit and build that transparency, because I think that you can end up like triggering like a huge defensive move from everyone where they go, oh, like at first signal, like that, we realize like they're exploiting our relationship or our data. Everyone is going to be like, all right, we're cutting off, we're pivoting over, and we're going to like either do it in house or we're going to go pick a different provider. We're going to do it, open source. And so I think it's a tough thing to manage over time, because one thing that is benefiting us all right now is at least there's a market of LLMs for you to be able to select from. Some work better in certain contexts. ChatGPT is like really great for like sort of general purpose. Anthropic is really building stuff that's like super awesome for developers. And we're just hoping that like these open models can actually do more and more. So, I've definitely been dabbling in trying to run an LLM locally on an old gaming laptop. It's fun, but it's not practical yet. Right. I'd have to have a way more powerful machine, and I don't really want to spend that much money on it.
Right. Yeah. Adam and I have been doing some local stuff as well. And what I call it, Adam, the gravitational pull, the tractor beam. That I think ChatGPT has is their product design. And it's the old open source versus proprietary, capitalized company who's laser focused on just like what they're doing so well is they're rolling all the latest advancements in to a product. And what all these other things are is they're models that you can use with a chat app UI built by one dev to scratch their own itch. Obviously, you can also have capitalized companies that use the open stuff to create a competing product, and that's happening as well. And I just think that I agree with you 100% that it's great that we have a diversity of options. And I think when it comes to models, they're being commoditized. I do not think OpenAI will hold a lead over the open source world that's meaningful for very long. Although Llama 4 just dropped and it's disappointing. So, but DeepSeek is really good. There's things happening right now. Meta seems to be not impressing with their latest efforts. But anyways, that I think open source wins, but that's implementation. Interface is what matters at the end of the day, like how people are going ahead and using these things, which is why Apple's so seriously dropping the ball right now, because they have the interface to everything and it's terrible. It's called Siri and they can't ship intelligence in it. It is like, think about the opportunity they had with Siri. They were so far ahead. They have the device, right? Like they literally have the interface. They have a 5-year lead. Alexa was the next one that got some penetration, but Siri was there and they got millions of people talking to Siri, and then Siri was just sucking over and over again for years. Yeah. And it could have been so much better. And then like they'd have, I'm glad kind of that happened, because they'd have lock on everything. Like you would just everyone would be talking to Siri. At least now it's a separate company, with ChatGPT being the new Google. I have people in my life who and these are not techies, who are like, did you ChatGPT it? It's the new Google. And so I think OpenAI right now, even though in their technology and their models and stuff is not really going to hold a moat, but in their product and their momentum. And so all these people creating MCP servers might just be making ChatGPT, the muscle, the superpower client. And so that's why I feel like, that's why I was likening it back to that previous decade where everyone's like, yeah, mash up our API with everybody else's. And then people started doing it and they're like, wait a second, you're not coming to our website anymore because you're just using our data to create better products or different things. And so now we're going to have to charge you for that. Obviously, you don't represent Square and the entire company or block. You represent a small portion of it. But I think when it comes to MCP servers, there has to be some trepidation in allowing, the full, not the full, but a lot of functionality that you provide to be used by people who maybe don't even know what Square is. They're just using it through their ChatGPT.
Yeah. I mean, like, I know that, for a lot of what we've been doing, we have like safeguards in place. There's a lot of folks out there who they use AWS Bedrock to do hosted models, be more confident that their data isn't being shared elsewhere. And trying to have some of these protections. But I think, over time, the one thing I think about, what gives OpenAI, I'm not super confident in this.
Sure.
That they actually, a lot of their moat right now is definitely their LLM model. But the interesting thing to me has been recently, with these smaller, they're essentially smaller updates that is just enough to cut out features that you find in other essentially ChatGPT wrappers.
Exactly.
When they say in their desktop client, hey, we're going to actually apply code directly into your VS Code. You're yeah, that's clearly a cutout for cursor. And it's the more you just bridge the little gap,
right,
and they can just choose to solve little parts of the problem. It's well, we're preventing them from eating too much of our lunch.
Right.
But we're going to continue to it's in a place where they don't even necessarily need to be front running everything. They can actually let open source and all these other things kind of front run things and then pick and choose the things that go, oh, people really like this piece of that puzzle. Let's actually just go bake that into ChatGPT.
Yeah, they can Sherlock the industry as Apple would always do with their third-party developers. Yeah, I think they're very well positioned to do that, and I think that they've shown competency in that. I say that from my personal experience because I've been trying to leave ChatGPT, and the product keeps pulling me back in. Most recently, the image generation stuff, which is a different, it's a different thing altogether. It's multi-model now, and so there's DALL-E involved, and I don't even have to care about that. It's it pulls me back in, and while I'm here, I'm just starting to talk to it again. And I'm oh, it's better than it was last time I was here. And so it makes it harder and harder for me to use what I had been using, which is Llama, and I've been trying DeepSeek, and I'm using, Google's Gemini for coding and trying out all these different things. But at the end of the day, it's ChatGPT just keeps getting better and better and better.
I feel like they're running that Netflix or HBO kind of playbook.
Yes.
Where it's as soon as the season's about to be over and you're all right, I don't need to be subbed to this anymore. Oh, wait, we rolled out the hot new thing.
Drag you back in. Yeah, they're dragging us back in.
Can't go away.
Totally. So I don't know. I think obviously we don't know what's going to happen with all these MCP servers. And I think it's similar to Google search back in the day where it's you have to be there. You can't not be there because then you're irrelevant. And obviously OpenAI is not the only people that will be using these MCP servers. So it'll serve all the needs of everybody. And so I think it's smart, at least for now, to be what's Square's approach right now? You guys have the hackathon, you tried some stuff. Is there going to be an official thing shipped or do you know?
Oh, well, now you're asking the things that I can't.
TMI.
Okay.
TMI.
So the thing I can say, because I did work on this. I know that from the DevRel side, we're definitely going to be pushing for getting this out there.
Yeah.
Somebody from our Goose team actually did a first version of a Square MCP server. In fact, when we were going to do this hack week, we looked at that and we were yeah, this is great, but it's only covering a very small portion. And then somebody on our team had a really innovative idea on how to do this and basically cover the entire service area in a single shot. And so we definitely want to get that out there and get people using it. The thing that I still keep in mind, and like, this isn't like reflective of what everyone else thinks within Block. I think it still requires a certain level of care. And I don't want to be like sort of like the doomsayer of like what ends up happening, but I can't help but like think like when you enable MCP servers for all of these different API platforms. So like I think of, this is probably, I'm going to ballpark a metric from a long time ago, but like say like the global number of developers was like 13, 15 million people. And this is like a number I'm pulling from years ago, so it's probably wrong. When you enable this MCP server to connect into like Claude desktop, ChatGPT desktop, plugging into anything else, the number of how you viewed developers before has just exploded.
Totally.
Like,
yeah, good point.
100x. Like it's now, and that's just like thinking about like how a regular person can now go enable this stuff. But that's also not accounting for like the very savvy developer who goes, well, why spin up one agent when I could spin up 20 agents to go do work for me? And so like it's just going to be this like exploding problem. And so like the thing I keep thinking about is like, can all of us handle the volume of a bunch of bots going around calling all of these things? Like, are we just going to see like a huge influx of DDoS? And like, I mean, it's hard to understand like what the second order effects of this are when you have just tons and tons of agents being spun up everywhere.
Yeah. Well said. Good thoughts. Exciting times, interesting times. Not sure exactly how it's all going to shake out, but that's what makes it exciting and interesting, right?
The question I think about is, where's the toll booth? That's where you make the money at, right? It's like you got a need and you want to create your own version of a toll booth. And to get access, you have to pay X. I suppose if you're thinking about that from a commercial standpoint or an enterprising standpoint, it's like, what is the next toll booth when it comes to this scenario? Like you've got agents that are going to go and spawn, let's just say, like you had just described. And that work was normally an individual opening up a book or going to the library or talking to so-and-so from, the county about how regulations work, like whatever, however these MPC servers, MPC, gosh. Anyways, these MCP servers act because you got agents that are going to go out there and scour the whatever to figure out information. And it may just be a dead thought, or it may be a new thought that spawns a new thing that's now this next layer of whatever. And it's so hard to even describe it. So if you're lost, I'm also lost. The point is like you've got all this traffic happening on the internet, all this API traffic, all this database traffic that is kind of probably not from a paid user, but it's like data that's important to the world. Really hard to see where the toll booth is going to be at for this one, though. I can't personally see where it's going to be yet. I'm thinking about it, though. Got some agents trying to figure it out.
It's interesting. I think like you make a good point because like the one thing I was like thinking about, I used to be like very allergic to this. Still kind of am. Like when you, I'm not opposed to like monetizing APIs, but I feel like when you monetize APIs, you have to kind of go about it in the right way because otherwise developers will never use it. But now with MCP servers, I kind of go, well, it's not like it costs almost nothing for the developer to now go use your APIs. So because they can just have an agent go do it for them and call them for them, and they're not, the barrier to adoption is like much, much lower. And so it does sort of beg the question of like, okay, if we're going to have like, say 10x more traffic, do we need to actually put monetization in here in some way? Or, go the ChatGPT approach, I guess, is like, we pitch our remote MCP server and it's, $5 a month. And like, you get near unlimited calls or something to connect to any of your other AI tools.
Right. Yeah, I think that seems somewhat feasible and likely, but can't see the future. I got some agents working on it, though.
Yeah.
Nice line. I heard somebody say recently, and tell me if this is how you all feel. They said, if you take ChatGPT away from us right now, we are dead in the wall. I'm paraphrasing, but it's a version of like just doom. We don't know how to work anymore. We have learned how to work because of the speed of trial and error and the speed of access to information and the speed of the user experience of asking and getting in this sort of volley back and forth. I heard someone say recently that they said, if you took this away from us, we wouldn't know how to work anymore. Is this how you all feel in any way, shape, or form?
No. I think it would suck. I mean, it would definitely suck because I think that there's like many ways that like, it has accelerated us, but I don't think I would argue that we're not quite at a point where like we would be like, oh my gosh, like we can't function. There might be some companies that might not be able to function because they let too many people go thinking that AI was going to automate everything. But I think there's still quite a few of us who'd be like, yeah, I still know how to write code by hand.
See, you're only doing the code context, though. That's the challenge.
I'm doing the whole life context. I'm answering whole life. My answer is still no. Because I just fall back to where I was a couple of years ago, which was just Googling stuff and looking at YouTube videos, Like for me so far, and I've used it extensively, aside from the joy aspect of the image generation, which for me is pure joy and I love it. And I don't want to go back to a life before I could turn someone into a walrus if I want to. Aside from that, I can just go back to Google and stuff. Like it's mostly just speeding me up. Like it's answering my questions, but I'll find the same answers. Maybe it'll take me half an hour versus 30 seconds. So I don't want to go back, but I don't feel like I'd be dead in the water or I'd be a fool or whatever I couldn't do my job.
This dooms, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not that.
Let me ask you a different question. Then. Okay. Same question, but different, because this is actually a good analogy, I think, potentially. Okay, so you're going from your house, let's just say into town, wherever into town is for you, right? You're going from your house into town. The old way was these back roads, right? Stop sign and so-and-so's house and landmark. Right. And you arrived at in town.
Sure.
Then you learned about this new thing called the highway, right?
Yeah,
and
fast.
And you went there so much faster.
Yeah.
This is how I liken it. And I don't disagree with what you're saying. I just wonder how truthful it is or how truthful you're letting yourself be, because once you've gone from your house to in town, the highway way, sans traffic. Okay. Just bear with me here. Okay. Don't put all the worst stuff in there. The speed version of it, the direct access, the get off the wherever and you're in town. When you go from here to there, the old way, the scenic route, the 30-minute route versus the 10-minute route via the highway, and then you have to go back to that old way, it does hurt. I don't care if you can still do it.
Yeah,
it still hurts.
I said that in my answer. I said I would suck. Okay. I don't want to go back.
Right.
I like the fast way more.
I would say like here's a different kind of analogy where I think I want to sort of like tweak what you had there, like in the transition from, a horse and buggy to a car. There was a transition period where like people were like just not getting horses anymore, and like they're like everyone's like getting cars. But imagine that like some sort of key failure, like all of a sudden we have no more fuel for cars. So we have all these like hunks of junk everywhere. And like now we're in this state of there's not enough horses for people to be able to get from point A to point B. And now everyone is like extremely disconnected. And so you can't get from where you are, like going from San Francisco to LA now takes like, you got to hike because you have no way of like really getting there, and you can only, take what you can carry. I think like there will be a point in time where we might get to that point where like we rely on AI for so many different components that if you suddenly shut it down, that like getting from point A to point B might actually be like essentially impossible because it would take too long.
It becomes impossible, not because it's true impossibility, but because it's like, gosh, no, I'm like, never going that way again. Like I went the 30-minute route to in town and that was no fun. Okay. I'm just never going back there again.
It's like 5 years from now, I want to go check my Square dashboard. And they're like, we don't have dashboards anymore. We're just the MCP server,
Exactly. Yeah. You are literally describing what I think can happen. Cause like, that's what people are proposing is like AI has like created like everything is just like voice chat. So you're just going to be like using Super Whisper to say like, hey, go ahead and update my business hours for the upcoming holiday. And then like, suddenly you turn off AI and it's like, wait, how do I actually go update my business hours? There's nothing in the dashboard here for me to go do this. Like, we could end up in that format where like, as soon as, somebody doesn't have access to AI, it's like, I don't actually have an interface. anymore.
We have to keep the ejection, we have to be able to eject.
Yeah.
Think about automatic cars, there's a way of doing things manually. I don't know, maybe there's not anymore. Who was I just talking to where there's if a car's battery is out, for instance, and it has an electric start, there has to be a way to start the car without the battery, or at least to shift the gears. Like to get it into neutral. So we had somebody stuck in reverse, and their car died. And it's
for real? What? This is for real?
Yeah. And it's like, well, you got to be able to, and there's and then a car guy came along and you see this little patch right here. You take this panel off and you stick a screwdriver in and you turn it and you can shift the gears manually. There's got to be a way to do it without the battery, even though 1,000 times out of 1,000, you're just going to use the battery to start the car. And so I think we have to do that with these things. We can't go all agentic, even though they're going to be the way in 10 years or whatever it is, because the agents will fail. Something's going to go wrong. And there has to be an ejection process. That Square has to still have a dashboard, Richard. You can't just get rid of it.
Let me ask you a question, Jared.
Yeah.
Or Richard too. You can both answer this question. Okay, let me think of a person. Do either of you have aunts or uncles? Yeah. Both of you, right?
Yes.
Just say yes.
Just say yes.
Of course, you've got somebody. You got somebody in your genealogy, right? Sure. Okay. Tell me your uncle's number. The uncle's phone number.
5050505.
You do not know. Do you really know your uncle's number, Jared?
That's actually his phone number.
Okay, so a different uncle, but you don't have it memorized because it's some sort of special number.
Isn't it the best phone number in history? Can you imagine that his phone number was, and he's passed away now, so it was 5050505. I mean, he didn't even pick that. It just came to him. Isn't that amazing?
That's a cool number.
Anyways, aside from that, yeah, I wouldn't know it.
The point is you forget to remember phone numbers because your phone has them in the context. Mm-hmm. You have it in the context, so there's no point of you've now just obliterated the need to ever remember. Now, my wife's phone number I know. My brother's phone number I don't know by heart. Who else's phone number do I know by heart? Not that many. I mean, a small few, sub 5.
My parents, my wife.
Right.
That's about it.
Sub 5. And the reason why is because the phone or the thing or the cloud holds the data and it's so accessible. And like you said, 1,000 out of 1,000 times you're reaching for the phone to get the number because it has the information.
But how would you get your brother's number if you didn't have the phone?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. How are
I
you
probably would not know how to reach my brother. I'd be like, okay, where'd that phone go?
We're driving to Pennsylvania, right? Or wherever.
Where's the internet so I can get access to this contact card because I have not personally remembered the phone number in my own brain. I've relied on a different brain, my second brain or whatever access to data. I mean, we're going to be like that at some point, right? Don't you think it's going to be the case is that there's just certain things you just don't have to remember anymore? Because for the most part, it's going to be there. There's my phone.
Cool.
Call brother. No. I stopped that from happening. It could totally do it. Just right there.
I'm sorry, I can't do that. Here's what I found on the web for call brother.
Would you like me to call ChatGPT for you?
Yeah. Sure. When it comes to memory, I think you're right. When it comes to functionality, there are certain things that you're going to have to be able to do. You can file your taxes manually with paper still.
Right. Sure.
Even though no one's doing that. So I think for mission critical things in life, of course, if you lost your phone and you need to get hold of your brother, you would probably find somebody between him and you who knows his phone number. And you'd say, hey, can you get me his phone number? And then you'd have it. So there are ways. But yes, we are going to probably forget a bunch of stuff and just ask LLMs. And then if they don't have the answer for us, we're going to be like the people in Idiocracy.
It doesn't exist. Yeah, it doesn't exist anymore. It's no longer true. If the agent can't find it, I'm thinking of this thing now, gosh, do you think we're heading to a point where you have an agent, I have an agent, and everyone has a small army, if that's even a proper word to use, of agents that we just now command?
A host of agents.
Have your agent do it.
Yeah, your agent, talk to my agent, we'll do lunch.
Right. And it's not a human agent. It's just it's what you refer to as your agent. It might actually have some humans behind it, but generally it's not a human. It's some sort of software.
I mean, I look forward to having a personal assistant What I don't look forward to is my personal assistant learning exactly how I do my job and then replacing me.
Right.
Yeah, like, oh, I'm just your agent for now. I'm shadowing you, Richard. I'm learning all your... Oh, Richard's not needed anymore.
That reminds me of my latest Galaxy Brain meme that I don't think I actually shared with anybody. You guys know the Galaxy Brain one? Where it's like a progression of like smarter.
Oh, yeah.
So the first one, which is like the small brain, was I program the computer. And then the bigger brain is the computer helps me program it. Okay. The next bigger brain is I help the computer program itself. And then the Galaxy Brain is the computer programs me.
That's where we're heading.
That's where we're heading, man.
And that's the truth, too. Let me tell you how that happens. Okay. Algorithms. When you go to the For You page, that's called programming.
Oh, that's true.
That's
already
true,
is
right?
programming me.
That's the way the computer's programming you. It's larger agents that are human potentially putting out things, deciding what content makes sense to you, and you're in the bubble you've put yourself in. And it's usually the world. Oh, man, this is getting doom and gloom, man. The world seems to be opt-in, but it's mostly by force. Like it's for the most part.
And only the privileged get to opt out. You have to be.
It's true.
You got to be in a position to be able to opt out. All right. Well, let's close on this then. If the algorithms are programming us, I think it might be time to pull the plug. This might be it.
Oh, by the way, we're producing podcasts that serve this. I'm just kidding. Serve this algorithm.
We're part of the problem around here.
Oh man, did we just get like deplatformed off YouTube from this?
Maybe.
At least demonetized.
So, I'm going to throw out a couple URLs. You can at least go to youtube.com/@squaredev. I don't know if that's case sensitive. Let me check it because we've had some instances where case sensitive was needed for.
Yeah. Just search for SquareDev in YouTube. You'll get there.
Even searching, just youtube.com/SquareDev works as well. So all the pods are there. Videos that Richard mentioned are there on YouTube. Even that infamous conversation I had with Jack Dorsey is a scroll or two back, sitting at 18,000 views. Let's get that up. Come on now.
Yeah.
That's not enough.
It's an interesting conversation. It's still relevant today.
It still is relevant today. There was more to that story, but we'll let it go for now. Samuel Jackson, call Siri and get us some directions to our favorite restaurant, please. It ain't going to happen. It's been fun. Richard. Thanks for giving us the chance to help produce the Square Developer Podcast. I think it's a super cool show. I'm glad that we finally got to a point where we can do it. I'm glad to have the season, rolling out as we speak. A lot of good stuff on there. Very proud of you and the team behind the scenes making it happen. Could not be happier. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate all the help that you've given us through this. And I got to say, it's fun being a guest. I want to try this out a little bit more. It's almost more fun than being a host.
Almost.
Almost.
Well, that's it.
All right.
Bye, friends.
Bye, friends.
All right. Bye.